Hi everyone, it's Jennifer and thanks for stopping by. One of my favorite things in crafting is to see how much I can stretch my supplies, how many new uses I can get out of what I have. Sometimes I come up with these things on my own and a lot of times they were completely accidental. Like today's video, this was something that I did by accident when I was at a stamping retreat back in the spring and I'm finally getting around to sharing it with you. What is fun about this technique is you get the look of watercolor without actually using any water. If you're like me and have some control issues with watercolor, this might be a good technique for you. You can use any kind of stamp images that have a lot of solid area. Now, I decided to do these examples using some stamp layering stamp sets. Now, these are really popular right now in card making, where you get a stamp set that has lots of images that you stamp on top of each other to get a fun layered look. It really makes for realistic results. Well, this is a new stamp set from Altenew, and this one actually is designed to look like watercolor when you stamp it on top of each other. But we're going to kind of stretch that and really make it look watercolor with the technique that we're going to use. But remember, you can use whatever stamp sets you may already have, especially those that are meant for stamp layering. Now, Altenew puts circles around which images go together, and they also offer a key for the stamp sets. This actually comes in the stamp set. It's color-coded. You can also find it on their website, but I like that they're color-coded and right on the package. So I cut that out of the package and put it in with my stamp pocket. The way this key works is you pick the images that go together on the front by what's circled together, and then you follow how they layer on top of each other using this key. So you see that little red line on the top of this image? There's a red line on the next image too. That's the point where those match up when you stamp them on top of each other. You use blue line for that image and the next image. And you just need to line up that point when you do the stamping. I'm going to show you in a moment if that doesn't make much sense. It's easier to see in action. Okay, so I'm going to do this stamp first, this second row of flowers there. So I got all the images out. I always start with the biggest, like farthest back image first, just because it helps me know how big this is going to end up on my card. Now I'm going to stamp this on Nina White 80-pound cardstock. I found this cardstock works best for this technique. You can try whatever cardstock you have, but I wouldn't go with the super heavyweight cardstock. 80-pound is great. And I'm going to stamp this with Hero Arts bubblegum ink. And we'll talk about ink in a little bit. I found that this Hero Arts ink works really good for this technique. Now it's time to look at my guide. I've stamped that first layer. Now I'm going to find the second image that we need to layer on top. And I'm going to put pencil marks on my paper to match the little marked lines I have on the guide. So these two little red marks that you see on the first image, I'm going to put little pencil marks right on my stamp piece. And we can erase these later. And I know they need to line up with the red marks on the second image that you see on the guide. So I'm finding those on my image. I'm going to ink this up with another Hero Arts ink. This one is called Ultra Pink. It's just slightly darker than the first image that we stamped. According to the key, I'm lining up with those little pencil marks that I put down, and there we have it positioned exactly where it needs to be. The nice thing about these stamp layering sets is they don't have to be stamped perfectly on top of each other, and you'll still get great results in the end. I promise, just stick with it and it'll look great. Okay, so now it's time for the third image to layer on top of here. I'm going to follow those little blue lines on my guide, put little pencil marks on my stamped image so I know where to line it up. This time I'm using a dark pink from Hero Arts. This is called Raspberry Jam. I'm going to stamp that right on top. So now you get this very modern watercolory looking stamped image that has nice crisp lines when it dries. But we're going to change this up. You could leave it as is, but we're going to change it up and soften it to make it look like watercolor. You can see in my card example here how much softer the edges are than the stamping that we just did. So we're going to do that now, change the look of this stamped image. First, I'm going to use an eraser to erase our little pencil marks. I also have a piece of plastic, just from some packaging, that I'm putting underneath my work surface. You could use regular cardstock, but you'll see why I use the plastic in a moment. Now I have my Copic Colorless blender pen. This is the only Copic marker we need for this technique. If you don't have Copics, you could still just get this one pen to do fun techniques like this one, and I'll link to some other videos in my YouTube description below and here in the annotations where you can see other things you can do with the Copic Colorless blender even if you don't use Copic markers. So what I'm doing is I'm heavily coloring over everywhere that I have that stamping on the front, but I'm doing it on the back of the paper. And I am saturating this completely. As you color, you can see the color kind of come through. So you know when you've covered the whole area, and you're going to go back and forth on this a bunch. The more colorless blender you put on the back of this, the better the technique will be. So we're really saturating the back, and what's happening is the colorless blender is soaking through to the front, reacting with that ink and making it kind of bleed a little bit, giving us a faux watercolor look. You can see that where I did this over the plastic, some of that color bled through onto the plastic. That's why I put that there, but you could just put paper underneath it if you want. Now, if you really want to make this kind of bleed a little more and really look watercolory, you can take your Copic marker and color right along the edges of your stamped image. Now, some of that ink color will transfer to the tip of your colorless blender pen. I just scribble it off on the side until the color comes away. It's really hard to damage these Copic marker tips. However, if you're concerned, you could buy a Copic colorless blender pen just for this technique, or just buy an extra nib for this technique. I clean my plastic off with an alcohol swab and a baby wipe. Okay, so now I'm using some brown ink. This is an Altenew paper bag brown ink, and I just put a little bit of that in the center, and now I'm going directly onto that with my colorless blender to soften the edges. I thought that'd be easier than going to the other side of the paper because I didn't want the brown and pink to bleed together. And now I'm just adding a little bit of that stamped image with the brown that I'm not going to blend much, just to give it a little definition in the center of this flower. Now it's time to do the other flower, the large flower. I just wanted to show you one more example. Inking this first layer up, the biggest layer, with that lightest color ink, the bubblegum from Hero Arts. I'm going to stamp that right towards the bottom here. And you'll notice I didn't really ink up my stamp well and stamp it all that great. It doesn't matter. This will smooth out in time, and also the colorless blender will help with that. Okay, so I have my little guide here. We're doing that top row of flowers. What I'm doing is I'm turning my guide to be oriented the same way as the stamp flower we just did. So you can see those are oriented in the same position. That's what I'm going to do this time. Instead of doing little pencil marks, I can just turn the second layer stamp to be in the same orientation as that on the little guide there, and we'll stamp that on top. Again, I'm using a slightly darker ink. This is that ultra pink once again. And I'm going to stamp it up just looking at that guide as a guidance for where this will stamp. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. It'll all look nice in the end, even if you don't stamp it perfectly on top of the first image. And now we're coming in with that third image, looking at the guide. I'm just orienting it correctly and stamping that on top with the darkest ink, which is raspberry jam. And you can see my finger got a little ink there. I'm not going to start over. I'm just going to go with it, and we'll cover that up later. No worries. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the back of this paper that we did with the first flower. I'm not going to show all of it because it's the exact same thing, but basically I put this face down on a piece of plastic. Just make sure your paper doesn't shift on the plastic and move the color on the plastic around. And I'm going to heavily saturate the back of this image with the colorless blender. I'm not going to do anything else but put a ton of this colorless blender on the back, and when we're done and we flip it over, we'll get that beautiful watercolor look to that large flower also. On this large flower, I didn't do any Copic blending on the front of the paper. It was all on the back. I just really saturated the back of the paper, and look at that great blending you get. It looks like watercolor. Okay, now for the leaves. I did a couple here, and I'm going to show you a third set. I'm stamping the bottom layer with Greenhill, one of my favorite Hero Art shadow inks, and then on top of that with Field Green, a darker green ink from Hero Arts. Now notice it's really bold and dark right now. Remember, this formulation of ink from Hero Art Shadow Ink is one of those that starts out dark and splotchy and it softens. So between that and the Copic blender we add to the back, it will soften quite a bit. So what we have on the right here will end up looking like the other leaves that are complete. So I am again flipping this over and adding the Copic Colorless blender heavily to the back. And what's neat is as you apply it, you can see it show through, so you know where to apply it. And I'm trying not to overlap with the pink that we've already done because I was happy with the blending on that. Now you'll notice here that it is very dark, but remember it will dry and soften, and you can apply more Copic around the front if you want to, or add even more to the back. You can stop along the way and put a little heat on with your heat gun to see how it's coming along with drying. But this is one of those techniques you just want to play around with until you're happy with the results. Now, if you've done this and you decided you want some green, some darker green in little areas, you can do this. Press your ink pad onto that plastic, pick up some of the color with your colorless blender pen and bring it onto your stamped image. However, this puts ink on the tip of your colorless blender pen, of course. I just scribble it off and I'm fine with that. It doesn't transfer to future projects if you scribble it off. But again, if you want to be super careful, you can get a replacement nib that you use just for this technique or a separate marker. I really think this technique is fun and a great way to get that faux watercolor look, like a very soft kind of muted image. Okay, now people are going to ask what inks this technique works with. Here's the thing. I encourage you to try whatever dye inks you may have. I really feel it works best with the Hero Art shadow inks and the other inks that have the same formulation, which includes the Simon Says stamp inks and the W+9 inks. Those inks happen to react with the Copic colorless blender and bleed. Now here is the example we just did on the left. Again, that was with the Hero Art shadow inks. Here's another example I did on the right using a different dye ink. This is the Altenew crisp ink. I really like these inks. They give great crisp results, and they come in combinations of 4 colors, so they're great for these stamp layering. You can see I did get that great faux watercolor look with these inks. I just had to play around with it a little bit more and add more of the Copic colorless blender. So you are able to use other dye inks. Now, what I encourage you to do is try whatever inks you may have. There's no need to go out and get anything new for this technique. Just try them. So here I'm going to test these out. This is just a little image I'm stamping. The first image I stamped with the Hero Arts Raspberry Jam, which I used earlier and I showed you it works great. The second image is with the Altenew dye ink, just another dye ink that I really like. It does have a different formulation though. Every dye ink has a different formulation. I'm going to the back of these and really saturating the back with the Copic colorless blender. Now watch, I even trace around the image because it shows through once you've saturated it. Really trace around the image to make sure that that bleeding occurs there and it blends out, giving that watercolor look. Now when I flip it over, you can see right away that they both have softened. The Hero Arts bleeds a little bit more right away. You can encourage it to bleed more by coloring directly onto the stamped image around the edge. With the colorless blender, remember you can scribble the color off to the side. Okay, now for the other dye ink image, I think you need to do some of that coloring right on the edge of the image to encourage some of the softening and some of the bleeding. It doesn't bleed as much just because the formulation is different. That's a good thing normally. Normally you don't want your inks to bleed with Copic markers. You really want them to stay crisp. But for this technique, we want them to bleed. So there you can get great results with other dye inks too. It just happens to work really well with the Hero Art shadow inks, which I know many of you have. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish off these cards. We have our watercolory backgrounds. I have another Altenew stamp set here. This one actually has these animals that you can stamp on top of each other, another layering stamp set with some baby sentiments. But I like the sentiments for non-baby, so I'm going to take that sending our love on the bottom and put this on my non-baby card. Now, I will tell you, I first stamped it onto my card in the center with black ink right on top of the image, and I thought that was lost. I didn't think it was bold enough, so we're going to cover that up. So I do this every once in a while. I'll stamp a sentiment, not happy with it, and I'll just cover it up. So instead, I white heat emboss the sentiment on black cardstock, and I'm going to add that with foam tape. This is my opportunity to cover that little ink blob that I got with my finger earlier. I'm just going to put that right over it. By the way, this card design with the flowers and the sentiment in the center is very strongly inspired by Tasnim. She is one of the owners of Altenew, and I will link to her incredible blog. She said I could say that I was inspired by her, so I just wanted to mention that, and I will link below in the YouTube description to her blog too. She's one of the great designers over at Altenew. Okay, so now I wanted to add a little bit of bling to this. So I have some wonderful sequins. These are from Lucy Abrams. They're called Little Things. I will link to where I get those also. I'm putting down a tiny dot of the Ranger Multi-Medium, which is a super strong adhesive that's great for sequins. I put down a little dot and then I put the sequin down into it with some tweezers. I really like this collection of sequins because they're matte sequins, like a matte gold. So it's not too bright. It's just a nice subtle bling. And I'm adding some tiny Hero Arts gems to the center of the sequin. Sometimes those little holes in the sequins kind of bug me. So by covering them with little gems, I don't know, I seem to be happier. I also added a few clear sequins also. People often ask how I figure out where sequins go. You can notice I always put kind of odd numbers down and I cluster a few close together and a few spread out just to kind of cover the card. So there you have a way to get a faux watercolor look using some of our favorite inks along with some Copic colorless blender. If you're interested in the products, I link to the main ones in my YouTube description below, and you can go to my blog at Jennifer McGuire Inc. for the rest of the supplies and much more information. Thank you for stopping by, and I hope I see you again soon.